as a reader, love that as well. And so, as a reader, always in awe of authors that are able to do that and do that well. And every book I read, I say, I'm learning. I'm learning from the masters and from people who've done this before me. And that pace is so important, and knowing where to lay the crumbs for the reader, because as readers, we want to be able to figure it out. It's also delightful when an author can, throw you for a loop a little bit too. I'm like, aha, I didn't see that coming. But it's very satisfying to be able to look back as a reader and look at the clues and say, okay, I see where that was leading me now.
This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba. In conversations with writers, something magical happens. And as readers, we begin to see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. And my hope is through these conversations, you begin to learn about their craft and them as a person, and you'll become like me, fiercely loyal and want to read their current book, entire backlist, or any future book they write. And when you see their name, you'll want to support them, not only as incredible storytellers, but also the thoughtful individuals you have come to know. So my guest today is Heather Gudenkauf. She is the Edgar Award nominated New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of 10 novels, including The Overnight Guest, her most recent thriller, Everyone is Watching. Her debut novel, The Weight of Silence, was an instant New York Times bestseller and remained on that list for 22 weeks. Gudenkauf's critically acclaimed novels have been published in over 25 countries, have sold over 2.5 million copies worldwide, and her books have been featured, deservedly so, on many best of roundups, including lists by the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, Amazon, Apple Books, Goodreads, and more. Her 11th novel, The Perfect Host, was just released last fall. Heather lives in Iowa with her family and what she refers to as a very spoiled German short-haired pointer named Lolo. In her free time, Heather enjoys spending time with her family, reading, swimming, and hiking, and is currently working on her next novel. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen.
So this book, The Perfect Host, can you just give us like a brief introduction to it? It's a topic that we see a lot more of lately. And so I think, of course, you're Heather Gudenkauf, so of course it takes a slightly dark turn. But can you give us a little bit of an introduction to the couple?
Sure. So Madeline and Wes Drake are a wealthy landowning, horse ranch owning family out in Wyoming, and they're expecting their first child. And so they decide to throw this huge over the top gender reveal party with 200 of their closest friends. And, in very lavish style. They have champagne, they have it catered, they have Reba McEntire coming in to entertain. They have a big, boom of a surprise for everyone, part of the reveal. And as the guests gather around and the big reveal is about to happen, something terribly wrong happens and their lives are changed forever. And that just sets off this chain reaction, a mystery that needs to be solved, and enters ATF agent Jamie Saldano, who comes in to investigate what exactly had happened on the ranch. And he has some secrets of his own, including a past with the town of Nightjar, where the story takes place, and the disappearance of his sister from years earlier. And so these stories kind of intertwine, and it's a story of small town secrets and family loyalties and sisters, and is really kind of a wild, wild ride, but has quite a bit of emotion in it as well, I think.
Without a doubt, the opening scene, Madeline's standing in this ginormous house and she looks out and she just sees nothing but land and the Tetons in the distance. It's almost as if I think she refers to as having her own personal slice of that mountain range. And so, of course, if you're in a house like that, the celebration is going to be absolutely epic. You mentioned Reba coming in. I was struck by the food being served. These grown-up s'mores with cinnamon graham crackers, milk chocolate ganache, candied pecans, and sweet coconut topped with an almond-scented toasted meringue. Is that something you created, make on a regular basis?
No, I'm not known, I would say, for my cooking, but it was sure fun researching some over the top party foods, and I had a lot of fun creating this um, very lavish barbecue for 200 people.
And it even has a theme. I think the theme is pearls and pistols. And so you have women, ladies kind of dressed up with that, with the strand of pearls. And then you have, because it's out in Wyoming, you have everybody, all the gentlemen walking around with pistols and guns. And yeah,
Packing
what could
heat. Yeah,
possibly
and
go wrong?
the whole thing is, completely absurd, right? And
Right.
that was kind of the point of it because we know, I think, um, people want to get together, find reasons to celebrate. And, celebrating a new life is always exciting. But, in doing my research, and I kind of put that in air quotes because I watched a lot of gender reveals online and how wild and over the top they became. And, they turned into almost like weddings, the
Right.
expense and the money put into it and just almost absurd. But what everybody really wants is for us, their child to be born healthy
Right.
and safe. So I thought it'd be really interesting to take, something that's supposed to be one of the happiest moments in a couple's life and turn it on its head and just see where it took me.
Yeah, I think the Drake family is well known generation wise in that part of Wyoming and pretty much kind of control things that are happening. And the town is called Nightjar.
Yes.
And so you mentioned Jamie Soldano coming, back as the ATF agent to investigate this. And I was curious about what Nightjar was. And apparently he was as a kid when his mom said they were moving there. And what he envisioned was like a mason jar, but instead of capturing the fireflies like we all did as kids, you were capturing the night. But the Nightjar is actually something else.
Yeah, it's a bird. And this is kind of a funny, interesting story about where I got the name of the town. As all writers do, we kind of mine our own lives for inspiration, whatever it may be. And honestly, my son lives over in London and I was visiting him and he took us to a pub and the name of the pub was Nightjar. And I was just so fascinated by that name. And that those kinds of things that I described in the book about, catching fireflies and the
Right.
night. And then, of course I learned it was a bird and I just tucked it away thinking, I'm going to use this in a book someday. And I did. And so that's where that came from. But yeah, so Jamie has this really complicated history with this town that he lived in for just a short amount of time. His family was pretty transient. He lived with his mom and his older sister, and he was around 11 or 12 at the time he moved there and felt very much the outsider in this town where there's a lot of generational wealth and landowners. And he was kind of a city kid. And one evening, one night, he and his sister are driving along the gravel dirt roads and they get in a little spat, a little fight, and she kicks him out of the car. And that's the last time he ever saw her and how that has haunted him through the years. So in writing this book, it's the Drakes were kind of the main event, of course, with Madeline and Wes and their relationship and their the birth of their child. But Jamie really stole my heart as, a character that came to me. I really had a fun time exploring his past and, what he was like and his history, so much so that a lot of it ended up on the cutting room floor because it's a thriller. I write thrillers and the pace needs to move along. But I just was so enchanted by his relationship with his sister
Yes.
that I kept wanting to write more about it. I
So
hope
does
it
that
came.
mean that he's going to be in another book?
I would love that. I don't know if that's in the cards, but I always say to my editor, this book could be a series. Maybe this one might be the one. And I definitely left some doors open for that
You
in
most
case
certainly
it
did.
is ever a possibility. I don't know if that would be in the cards, but it's fun to think about.
So you mentioned that, you enjoyed this character, as did I, because one of the things that you do really well is you paint such complex characters. I mean, that's essentially what we are as human beings. You know, we're not all good, we're not all bad, and why we do certain things or don't do certain things. And so you're able to capture that. So you have, like, you know, somebody who's an ATF agent who's supposed to be perceived or maybe stereotyped as this tough guy. But, you know, we all have a history to us. We all have life experience that comes before where we are today. And contrasting that, I think you did a wonderful job. There's something very tender about him,
Yes.
you know, and at
Yeah.
the same time, there's also like this big important job that he has to do to hold people accountable and look at facts and try to figure out and piece together what happened.
Right. I love the way you put that. Yeah, we do all come with a history and a past to wherever whatever point we are in our lives. And I really wanted that to shine through with Jamie. And, you know, the ATF part, it was so interesting, so informative. I had the opportunity to connect with an ATF agent who spent a lot of time visiting with me about the ins and outs of the job and what it means and the work that they do and the logistical parts of it. And I learned so much and, you know, things that we don't even think about, obviously, because that's not part of our worlds typically, but was very grateful to have that expertise and those bits of factoids that, you know, could insert into the story to hopefully give it a realistic flair.
Absolutely, you did. And so, how does that work? You know, I'm imagining what your Google search must look like.
Not pretty.
Or maybe you use Tor or something else, but how was it that you're able to do the research? I mean, obviously you're a best-selling writer, so people know who you are when you call or reach out to them, I imagine.
I do obviously look for experts in their field, and I typically start close to home and try to find a connection that way. And so I have a nephew who's in law enforcement in a town in our state, and I started with him and like, do you happen to know of any ATF agents or anything? And then that opened up some doors and talking to another person who talked to another person and got me to the right person for
So it's
this.
6 degrees of Heather, not 6 degrees of
Well,
Kevin Bacon anymore.
but I do that with, you know, most of my research, whether it's, you know, for medical reasons or
Mhm.
legal things, you know, I search for people nearby, but sometimes that takes me kind of far flung, which is great because, you know, there are a million billion other people out there. I mean, 4 billion other people out there in the world, however our population is now, but that are much smarter than I am. So, you know, I'm stuck in this little room writing.
Not true.
We have to reach out and find experts
Yeah,
to
and
help.
if somebody were looking for a subject matter expert in how to write best-selling thrillers, you know, they would see you. I mean, we can't all be experts at everything. So
That's too kind.
the thing is, you do a lot of research, but as a reader, you don't bog us down with really complex details. It's enough for us to understand, but not overwhelm and kind of get, I want to say, distracted or slow that pace down, which is so important to you as a thriller writer. So, how do you decide what goes in and what goes out? Do you have like a beta reader that's like, whoa, I don't need to know about the.
Yeah. Yes, I do. I have, you know, you actually. My sisters are early readers. I have a really good friend from elementary school who
Aw.
reads early drafts. I have a woman who became actually a friend from Facebook. We've never met, but she's a, you know, an avid reader, reads a ton and really smart. And she's gone through my manuscripts to help me out some. And then my agent, of course, and my editor. We have a very collaborative relationship. So when my editor gets it, she always, you know, they have that eagle, that bird's eye view of a project. And, you know, I've spent so many months working and digging in that sometimes I can't see, you know, exactly
You're too close.
too close to it. And
Right.
having, you know, an editor that I'm so collaborative with is incredibly helpful. So getting other sets of eyes on the book, the manuscript is huge.
Approximately, I'm just kind of curious, how long does it take you when you're writing a book? Like,
Yep.
I'm sure you have like what everybody refers to as the ugly first draft, and then you hone, hone, hone. And then I would imagine that manuscript, after a couple beta readers and some feedback, then goes to an editor.
Correct. Yes. And it varies with each project
Okay.
because like with our, you know, all our children, they're all very different and have different needs. And
Yeah.
So it takes me a little, I do like all authors, I think a lot. And so there's a lot of thinking that goes into it and planning and not even sitting behind the computer for that. It might be in a notebook or just walking and thinking. And and this is something I've come to later in my career with being more of an outliner. In the beginning, I was more of writing by the seat of my pants, a pantser. And that really worked for me for a long time, but it's not as efficient as, maybe we'd hoped it would be for myself and for life. And as you know, with life, things come up and, I find myself with projects and having to step away for maybe weeks or even a month or two at a time because of family health and such.
Right.
And then coming back into the project, not knowing where to dip my foot back in because I didn't have that map
Okay.
there for me. And so with recent books, I've started outlining and it does help me. It helps me kind of ground myself when I step away from a project and come back in. It's a path, but it's not written in stone because I do think some of the most magical moments in writing are the ones that take you by surprise. And those are my favorite. So I
I
kind
think as a reader, I would say the same.
yeah, combination. So there's plotters and pantsers, and I think a plantser. I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really kind of cool if you kind of have an outline. I know you said not written in stone, so it can change at any point in time. But it's always surprising to us as readers, kind of turning the pages and, oh my goodness, I didn't see that coming, or oh wow, that's and so even though you kind of have an idea where you're going, to still be able to convey that sense of edginess on a page and keep us turning, I think is such a great skill to have.
Yeah, I mean, as a reader, love that as well. And so, as a reader, always in awe of authors that are able to do that and do that well. And every book I read, I say, I'm learning. I'm learning from the masters and from people who've done this before me. And that pace is so important and knowing where to lay the crumbs for the reader, because as readers, we want to be able to figure it out. It's also delightful when an author can, throw you for a loop a little bit too. I'm like, aha, I didn't see that coming. But it's very satisfying to be able to look back as a reader and look at the clues and say, okay, I see where that was leading me now.
Right, but you can't leave too many or we as readers figure it out too soon, and you can't leave too few so that we get to the end and we're like, "What? That
Yes.
that was kind of a, I wanna say cheap, gratuitous thrill,"
Right.
but yeah, so it is a balance, and you seem to have found that right balance for your books because there's always something that when I look back and I'm like, "Of course, hindsight's 20/20," but you look back and you're like, "Oh, I should have gotten that." But I'm glad I didn't because it was super exciting to read page after page and like, okay, cereal for dinner, laundry's done. I'm not worrying about anything else. So
Thank
yeah, absolutely. So I'm still struck by these, gender reveal parties and how things go tragically wrong. And in this, there's an explosion. I'm not giving anything away because that happens very early on, but it's the source of it and, you know, who it was intended for and who did it and why. And so in come characters to the story. You have Madeline's stepsister, who shows up after the gender reveal party's over, kind of as like a surprise. They don't get along because the stepfather passed away, and instead of leaving his estate to her, he leaves it to Madeline to control because, yes, the stepsister's a bit of a wild card. Never quite the responsible one. So there's a
right.
lot of tension between the two of them. And then you have this waitress who is kind of this lost soul that all of a sudden she doesn't have a job because the catering company is impacted by this. And I'm always kind of struck by the fact people who live kind of relatively isolated, they live on this gigantic part of land. And
Right.
I think, somebody comes to your door and needs help. Are you, I want to say lonely, but craving enough company because Madeline's husband, Wes, travels a lot.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you set yourself up because you need some companionship and friendship and not to feel so alone in this gigantic house while you're incredibly pregnant.
Right. And I think we find that with Madeline. When we first meet her, we see this this absolute, it's this wealth, and it seems so I say this a million times, but over the top and just so extravagant. And we're not, at first we're not sure if we like Madeline. We're like,
Mhm.
this lady, she has all this and, poor little rich girl kind of thing. But we get to know very quickly that she's out of her element here. This isn't what she hopes for. It's not what she craves. The land and the abundance so much as being happy and, of course, having a healthy child and her friendships. But she is lonely and she feels very isolated where they're at because surrounded by mountains, and she's on this property by herself. Really, her horses are her friends.
Mhm.
And then enters, her sister, who she does have a very complicated relationship with, very much a love-hate. And we learn that they had a falling out, not in the not too recent past. And she's surprised to find her sister on her doorstep because she wasn't invited. She wasn't invited,
Purposely not invited. You kind of crash a gender reveal party, I guess.
I guess. And then Melly, the caterer who's injured in the explosion along with Madeline, and they share an ambulance ride together and they really bond. They really bond there. And so when this young woman shows up on her doorstep, searching, asking for help, Madeline just feels very beholden in a way, or connected, that she needs to bring her into her home. And that could be the beginning of her life. No, it's what we try to find out as we read.
I'm struck by Lucy, her stepsister, right? And Madeline kind of observes her and how she interacts with people. Like they don't really seem to get along at all. And yet Madeline talks about Lucy as, somehow always finds a way to slither into people, into their good graces. And today she's putting on a good show.
Right,
And I just
right.
think, gosh, we all do that from time to time, right? We perform or, we kind of mask. But it is maddening for her to see her sister like she's not a great person, and yet everybody seems to like her and find her incredibly funny and charming and
Exactly. And, I think, and I'm so fortunate. I have 5 older brothers and sisters who I adore. And so my relationships, are nothing like, sibling relationships are not like what's in the book. But I think we get to know, our siblings in it, that, their strengths, their weaknesses, ins and outs, and that what maybe other people don't see. And this is really just an elevated example of that. And it doesn't help that, Wes is kind of opening his arms to Lucy. And then that becomes a whole other issue. Like, how manipulative is this situation? Who's manipulating who? What's happening? Who do you trust?
right.
And that's a question for everybody in the book.
Right. And for us as readers trying to figure that out as we're kind of like observing from outside the dynamics that are happening. And we all know, and I think you make a reference to it in the book, that a lot of these dynamics are amplified when there's grief or money involved. So that sets a whole other set of things because we just act differently with regard to different situations, and everybody handles the very same experience differently.
Right.
And there's also a great theme in the book about female friendship and how strong it is and how it's different than the relationship you have with your husband or your partner. And that thread woven through that there's really nothing quite like it. And I think that's part of what we realize with Madeline is that she doesn't really have that strong friendship, that strong presence. And so maybe she's looking when Melly, the waitress, shows up and
Right.
knowing that
Right.
they bonded. When you go through tough stuff, whoever's right there with you, that kind of connects you, that pivotal life experience.
Right. And, and Madeline, as we get to know her, we come to find that she's very generous and real person. And she wants to help. She wants to have an impact on other people she wants people to like her. And so she opens her heart and her home. And, uh, there are effects of that, there are consequences. And so she finds herself, on this isolated ranch with two women that she doesn't know if she can trust. One of them's her sister, stepsister, and one of them is this young woman who has come to her injured and needed help. And there's nobody there to help her, in this situation. So she's kind of got to uh, you know, figure things out. And the reader has to come along for that ride as Madeline takes that journey.
And I think the great thing about this book is you have that whole storyline going, the dynamics between the three women that are living in the house while Wes is kind of in and out on business. And at the same time, you have Jamie, one of my favorite characters that you've written so far, Soldano, reconciling not only what happened, the source of the explosion, and who was responsible. I know it's so hard. We're talking like in code because we don't want to give anything away. But he's also trying to reconcile the past with what happened when his sister disappeared. And I have to say, I like Juno. You have her appear with this great banter, this back and forth between Jamie and his, sister, and like some of these great one-liners and snarky comments and typical siblings. We all kind of are able to
Right.
find humor in things or call somebody, sarcastic or dramatic. And it really works, I think, in this book. Kind of helps to lighten that loss that he feels because he still kind of carries her with him.
Right. And as I was writing this book, I had, within a couple years, I lost both my mom and dad, and, who we were, my whole family, very close to. And it was a very hard, very difficult situation. And I found myself, and I've had loss, of course, before, but nothing as profound as that, as losing my folks. Um, I I found myself talking to them, like, "Oh, mom, like, here we go," or "Gosh, I could really use your advice right about now, dad." I found a lot of comfort in that. And as I was writing Jamie and his story, I imagined that he would probably be doing the same with his sister. And being the age that they were when this all happened, I imagined Juno being, a typical big sister, like, come on, you idiot, like, figure this out. And, and yeah, I liked how you said, like he carried her with him, on, everywhere. And coming back to the scene of the crime really made it all the more profound, and really that urgency that this has gone on too long. I need to figure out what happened to my sister, because law enforcement has this case is stalled, and maybe Jamie, can figure this out.
I like the structure of the story. You tell from multiple character perspectives, which is always great because it's just like life that everybody's kind of experiencing the same situation, but differently based on, who we are, what's happening at the time. But Melly, you chose to narrate from a first person perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that choice?
Yeah, Melly, who's, like a 21-year-old waitress, caterer, and not like didn't have the most parts or sections in the book, but her voice to me as I wrote, I'd started out everybody in third person.
Hmm.
Like I'd written that in
Right.
person. And I found that Melly's voice was unique. And I felt like, okay, I can make this even stronger by having her tell her story in her own voice. She had kind of, a sassy, very, not entitled, but like, I've been through so much, I deserve this kind of attitude. And so, um, I thought it would be a good way to really let readers kind of get into the head of Melly, but she's also pretty cagey. She doesn't want people to get too close either. So even in her first person point of view, she's got a bit of a wall. But we get a sense of what she wants, and that she'll do anything to get that as well.
Yeah,
And
she has a bit of a chip on her shoulder for sure.
I also find, I often write in multiple perspectives. I think all but one of my books is
Hmm.
written with multiple characters. And in this one, there were three female lead characters, and then Jamie. And you run the risk, if you write in first person for everybody, that they tend to sound alike. And so by putting in that different perspective, turning it to first person or third person or whatever it might be, is important. So yeah, so most of the book was written in third person until I thought Melly needs her own story to tell here. So it was fun to do.
It was certainly fun to read, from her perspective to gain a little bit more understanding of who she is and where she comes from, for
And she came
sure.
it's very tough and not necessarily likable, but I think in hearing her voice and kind of hearing there, I had a lot of sympathy for her as well because she put herself in some bad positions, but there were people there around her who took advantage of her as well. And she was, trying to find her way the best way she could and not making the best choices in doing so.
And she's incredibly young. I mean,
Young.
so young, so that explains some of it. Like you worry about characters who are in my age bracket who are still making bad decisions.
Mistakes, right?
Exactly. The other thing I liked about Jamie, when you talk about this in the book, is his skill at being able to get people to talk to him. How
Yeah.
he makes people at ease, how he makes people feel comfortable, which is an incredibly good skill if you're somebody who's investigating and your job is to ask questions to gain answers or insight. But it's different if you're approaching a very sensitive situation that has, a tragic component to it, to be able to be somebody who can hold that space while asking the tough questions.
Right, and I think with Jamie, with his background, with, his kind of unstable childhood and the loss of his sister, I kind of thought of him as a watcher, as somebody, a character who would stand back and kind of watch the world go by as a child and take everything in, but not necessarily jump in and participate. And so he gathers a lot of information by watching people. But of course, and if you're an investigator, you have to ask the questions. But he does have a way of disarming people and making them feel comfortable. He does have, as in law enforcement, you do need to have that kind of presence, but he does it in a way that people want to help him for the most part. And that that he's there for the greater good and trying to uh solve this crime. And people like him. He is a likable guy. But along the way, as with most investigations, he ends up, hitting a few brick walls. And we even find a point in the book where he loses his cool.
Yes.
And we were like, oh, when Jamie's mad, we know it's pretty bad here.
Certainly understandable. At the same time, I'm thinking about, how people are with one another and who do you trust and how do you trust them? And I'm also thinking about his sister disappeared in a time period where we didn't have the internet like we know it today. We didn't have social media. We didn't have that digital footprint of, wherever our phone goes, there we are kind of thing. And you have it contrasted with, what happens during the gender reveal party. And I found that really kind of interesting to juxtapose the two.
Right. When Juno disappeared, there was no footprint. You're right. There was nothing. And with the gender reveal and the explosion, there were hundreds of cell phones and there was footage. And so that adds another layer of the investigation of going through cell phones and to see if they caught anything or if the photographer caught anything. And of course, because it's an explosion and their incendiary devices were trying to track down the components of that bomb and where somebody could have gotten it. And so it's just a whole different world of investigation or, maybe some of the same basic steps of it, but the way we go about getting that information, I think in law enforcement has changed so much and over the years. So yeah, so we went from this one case where there was no information, no clues to where there's almost too much to sift through.
Right. We were talking a little bit earlier because we are both proud owners of card catalogs. And that was how I researched when I was younger. I mean, you were limited to author, title, subject. And so you didn't have as many, as you said, like sources or pieces of information. So you were able to make an informed decision because you were reading, the introduction, the conclusion, the abstract, and in the end. And now that if I use a database. I put in one thing and I come up with like, 10,000, 12 results, and I'm having to figure out like which is the best one. And so in library science, dorky, but we talk about people do satisficing, where it's enough to satisfy the requirement of what you're looking for without sacrificing tons of time. Because if you had to read the abstract and the conclusion for everything, even if you filter, your parameters, it's overwhelming. And trying to make sense of it all is just as big a job.
Yeah. Exactly, and yeah, so getting those first person interviews, hugely important. But yeah, the books I checked out, the books I bought, the internet searches, and how do you condense it down into something that's meaningful and helpful for a thriller? It's you hope you get it right. You hope
Yeah.
you get it.
Yeah. I would say you've got an impressive track record. So for sure, you get it right. Absolutely. I think it's just fun to think about your research process and to think about how you go about writing the different perspectives and making sure each voice comes across differently and unique.
Yeah, to build these worlds for each of your characters and backstories that I keep a notebook where each character has a tab in the notebook, and I write down everything I can possibly build for their history, and some of it gets in the book and some of it doesn't. um I feel like that's the way I get to know the characters, and I feel like and I know many authors say this, but I get to know my characters as I write. And so who they are might be just like we do in our everyday relationships and getting to know people. It takes time. And so the more I write, the more I'm into the book, I get to know them better, and the characters reveal themselves to me. And then as I add to the notebook, then I go back and might layer in more of the details that I learn about them along the way. They
Yeah. I mean,
become real
yeah.
people, strangely, as you write.
No, but I think it helps inform the story and the scenes because you know how that character so well, you know how they would act in that particular situation. And that takes time. I imagine when you go for your walks, you may have one or two characters tagging along with you, or you're folding laundry and this one's saying, I don't want to do that. That's not really, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah, they're always tagging along.
Now, since you've written, I'm just curious, since you've written 11 books, it's a big group walking with you. Do some characters stay with you longer than others, or how does that work?
Yeah, with each book, there are characters that stick with you. They're definitely up. But in looking at my body of work, there are definitely some that I wonder where they would be today. For example, Callie from The Way to Silence, my very first book,
Yes.
that character, I often think about her, about where she would be now. I think of Amelia from Not a Sound, and yeah, they do. They stick with you, and you're like, I wonder if I should ever revisit them and revisit their story and try to continue it. And most often, it's like, no, I think their story's been told, but I like to think about, I think of them fondly, like old friends.
I would have to agree. I mean, as a reader, there are certainly characters that stick with you, that you just want kind of tagging along with you for things, or ones that, you would want to talk to yourself. Jamie, what do I do here? Or Madeline, like, hey, do you have like some clothes I can borrow? I'm heading to, right?
She has a great closet
She does have a great closet. I was a little envious of that, for sure.
too.
Yeah, and then I was struck by like her choice and Wes's choice in terms of how they chose to decorate their nursery.
Yeah,
Completely white. And I'm thinking
yeah.
that's a kid. There's messes inherent with kids. And I know when they're little, they're not, really moving just yet on their own, but
And I think, that's part of revealing the characters. And we learn that really wasn't Madeline's design. It was like her husband had this aesthetic in mind. And, Madeline just would have been happy with the rocking chair in the bedroom in a crib. And yeah, so she isn't so caught up in, what the neighbors think, but her husband absolutely is. And Madeline wants to make her husband happy too. And so she kind of along for the ride. So even in all those little choices, we learn what makes each character tick and what's important to them.
It's a dangerous game that, the whole, keeping up with the Joneses, but, making sure that your presence, your life of luxury is apparent to everybody, that becomes the defining thing. And clearly, we learn Madeline is not comfortable with that.
And how exhausting that has to be for, for people and anybody, whatever your social, just trying to run that show, it's got to be tough.
I even think in the very opening scene, she's kind of like frustrated because her dress isn't white fitting properly because she's pregnant, and then she can't put her shoes on, and her friend's just like, "Here, wear some flip flops." Like that's who she is. She would just show up in like flip flops and a relatively simple thing, but it's this whole appearance that she has to do because she loves her husband and it's important to him, so wants to support him.
Right, right. And
So
I think, yeah, so telling. We just never really know what's going on behind closed doors.
yep. I think there's a line in here that people are exceptionally good at hiding their dirty little secrets and when desperate will do just about anything. I
Yes.
just think,
There are lots of characters in this book who are desperate to do that. Yes.
yeah.
Find
Um,
those.
the other thing you do a great job of is setting the scene for
Thank you.
for what Wyoming feels like. I mean, you even talk about how the night silence and the night sounds are different. And so you can almost just hear it as you're reading the book,
Thank you.
which is really kind of neat to experience and feel that expanse of space. This
Mhm.
isn't set like in an urban setting where there's cars hustling and bustling down highways and people stopped in traffic and trying to get here. There's just something very soothing about having all of that wide open space and those gorgeous views of mountains.
Yeah. Yeah. And, readers who've read my books know that typically my books are set in Iowa
Right.
where I live. And I love writing about Iowa. I do. I love it. But for, a few of my books, I needed to take my character out of their safe space into, something that's unknown. And this story is the case of that, having to take Madeline away from what she knew to her husband's world, which was out west, which, I love to go visit out west. I just think it's so beautiful. And, like you said, the wide open spaces, the mountains, and the isolation of it was perfect for this story. And so, about every year, my husband and I will travel out west, take a car ride. And I try to I call myself a wannabe cowgirl because I've been on a horse I can count probably on one hand. Whenever I get a chance to, I want to do that. And I just think it's such a beautiful country and was perfect, a perfect location for this book.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely, loved because I've not been that far out west. I've been to other places, but I was just like, yeah, now I want to go. I've read like Craig Johnson and Longmire. So like, and then you have it with this. And I was like, oh, this is just telling me I need to go out west.
Right. And there's no hustle, there's no bustle. It's all just beauty. And there's something very peaceful about that.
Yeah, I just don't know if I could. Probably I could because I'm a bit of an introvert, but live that all the time versus escape to it for portions of a time.
That would be interesting. I think I could. I think I could, like, I could go many, many days without leaving my house and I would be perfectly okay with that, honestly. But you're right. I don't know. Like after a long, cold winter, dark, cold winter, I don't know. It's a good question, but it is beautiful to visit.
My friends and family kind of laugh at me because people talk about going to these silent retreats and they're like, no fair. Like you can't go because you would like it too much.
What do you mean you can't? Nobody's talking. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So your previous career, I think it's fun to kind of point out that you were a teacher. You
Yeah,
taught little ones.
I did. I did. I taught primarily third and fourth grade and loved it. Loved every minute of it. And, it was just joyful to being around those little kids. And, I spent 26 years in education. So I continued that through really quite recently, till about 6 years ago during the pandemic when I stepped away from my education career. But I had lots of different roles in education. I taught lots of grade levels, mostly third and fourth, but I was an instructional coach, which meant I helped with curriculum and other items with teachers and principals. And I was our Title I reading coordinator, which was
Awesome.
a position where I was able to help coordinate reading programs for at-risk students and in lower economic schools. And it was a real privilege. I had the opportunity to work with some fantastic teachers who their sole goal was to give children the joy of reading and to make that positive. So I've been so lucky to be able to do two things in my life that I'm incredibly passionate about,
Yeah.
education and writing. So I
And
can't.
no, I think it's terrific. And you're right. The joy of reading, I can't imagine not having that. And I'm so grateful for the teachers that invest the time to make sure that, kids are able to read. It opens up a whole different world. I mean, there are places you can, like, I just traveled to Wyoming, right? And didn't have to leave my house, or you learn something as you're reading. It's just, there's so many reasons why reading works for people.
When I started out as a young person, I was excited to go to school, but when I got there, I had a terrible time. And I was so far behind my classmates and couldn't read, and math was a disaster. And I was discovered I had a profound hearing loss in the middle of my first grade year. And once that was discovered and I was fitted for hearing aids, it's like the whole world opened up and my life absolutely changed. And, early intervention from teachers who were great about giving accommodations to me.
Right.
And then on, when things turned around, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. And if I just think about what trajectory my life would have been taken if that wasn't discovered. And if I didn't have the teachers who are willing to work with me on the right path.
Yeah. And then you turned around and gave it right back.
I hope so,
Which,
because I sure loved it.
yeah. And I'm sure they loved you. And I'm sure like some of them are a little bit more grown up now saying, oh, yeah, I had Mrs.
I know. I find out, my gosh, some of my first class of students are like so grown up and like, what happened? What
Yeah.
happened?
Well, they got older. We didn't, is
That's
kind of,
right.
look at my nieces and like, how are you driving? How are you a junior in high school?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem
So
possible.
yeah, no, I would talk to you, the rest of the day, but time just flies. So as we get, to wrap up, this is storied end. The final 5 questions. When you were pregnant with your children, did you know what their gender was before they were born?
So I have 3 children,
Mhm.
and 2 of them I did know. And the reason we know is because we had some minor complications with them. So we had to have more frequent ultrasounds. So
Okay.
for my first child, we found out my middle child, everything was smooth sailing. So we like, let's be surprised. So we were, which was great. And then for our third child, we had some hiccups along the way. So we found out there too. So both are fun.
Super fun. But yeah, no big crazy gender reveal parties, I'm
No,
assuming.
that
No.
would probably never happen at my house.
Okay. Next question. Reba is flying in to perform at this gender reveal party, right? So at your
Right.
next book launch party, who would you invite to perform?
Oh my gosh, what a question. Okay. Who would I? There's so many. Oh my goodness. And I think this is so funny because I'm not a Swiftie, but that's who's coming to my mind. I mean, I love her stuff, but I don't consider myself a Swiftie, like
Right.
it would be great to have Taylor Swift. She's so empowering and
She is.
yeah, she would,
She's a great storyteller.
yeah, great storyteller. So that I think I would do that.
You live in Iowa. Have you ever met Caitlin Clark?
I have not met Caitlin Clark. I have not, and I would love to because I'm a huge basketball fan. I'm a huge women's I watch every game for a long time, and I could probably name just about every player in the WNBA now and college basketball, and I just love it so much. So yeah, she's great. She's an inspiration, such a hard worker, and so much fun to watch.
Yeah. What she's doing for like the next generation, I think
I
is I think is special.
I do too. And I think what she also really highlights is that there were women and young women along the way who've done that as well, but didn't get the recognition that she's been getting because of circumstances and because she's a fantastic player. But it also allows that limelight to be shared with so many who have come before and who are coming after. And it is so much fun to see young people excited about sports and women, young women, girls excited and boys wearing, number 22. It's exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited for the season to start. And I believe next year, is it next year or the year after, Cleveland is getting a WNBA team back. We used to have one when I
Yeah,
first moved here, and then it went away, but now we're getting another. So I'm super excited.
it is great. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I wish like Dawn Staley could come coach me, or Kara Larson from Duke. I mean, both of them. So
I agree.
incredible. Yeah. And there's actually, I think, a new documentary on Pat Summitt, which I think would be interesting to watch.
Now, I know we're getting off on basketball, but I played back in the day when there was 6-on-6.
Wow.
And so I invite people to look it up because to explain the rules would take a while. And one of the last classes in our high school that played 6-on-6 women's basketball. And so it's been so fun to see how
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah,
changed. Yeah. And the opportunities out there for
for
young women.
sure. Yeah. What's your favorite card game?
Oh my gosh, I don't really play cards. Although, like in Iowa, a big one, I couldn't even tell you how to play it. Euchre is huge.
Okay.
Euchre. Couldn't
Euchre
tell
was
you.
big when I was in college, but yeah, I used to play gin rummy with my grandma, which was,
My husband's family tried to teach me that as well.
yeah, I've since forgotten, but was fun while I did it. And the final question, what song is always on your road trip playlist?
What song? Okay, gosh. I like oldies. I love Fleetwood Mac.
Me too.
So Dreams or, anything. I listen to just about everything and it just depends on the mood. I like musicals, so I'll have those on my playlist too. And I'll, like when I'm writing, I'll often have classical music on. Or in the case of whatever book I'm working on, like Jamie from The Perfect Host was really in the 90s kind of hard rock. So I would listen to that as I was writing Jamie's character.
Very
So,
cool.
try to get into the heads of my characters sometimes as
Super
well.
fun.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. A thank you to everybody who's listening, and a huge thank you to Heather for taking time to talk about her latest book, The Perfect Host. Like her other books, Heather always creates complex characters who face challenging situations, and those echoes will remain with you when you finish reading the book. And then you'll crave the opportunity to talk to people after they've read the books because you can't believe these things just happened. To find out who else is a guest, go to storytocount.com. This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba.